I'm Mahanur Yusuf, and I graduated from Harvard Business School in 2016 with a PLDA. I'm also co-chairing Harvard in Tech Seattle chapter. Harvard in Tech is the official Harvard University-wide alumni group for technology. We hope to further the development of technology through encouraging innovation, providing resources and network, and promoting technological activity throughout the Harvard community. I'm here with Stephan Harper, my fellow alum and co-chair Harvard in Tech Seattle, to present a discussion session with Dr. Amy Mezulis on maintaining mental health during COVID-19.
I am Stephan Harper, a contract software engineer at Microsoft. I graduated from Harvard in 2012 with my ALB. I am also co-chairing with Mahanur for Harvard in Tech Seattle.
Thank you, Stephan. So Dr. Amy Mezulis, a Harvard alum, co-founder and chief psychologist at UpLift, which is a mobile app-based model for mental health care designed specifically for youth and young adults. Dr. Mezulis is also professor and department chair of clinical psychology at Seattle Pacific University. She has received an American Psychological Association Dissertation Award, as well as competitive grant funding from National Association for Research in Schizophrenia and Depression, and the National Institute of Mental Health. Dr. Mezulis maintains professional collaborations with colleagues in both the United States and Europe. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Mezulis. We are so honored to have you at this discussion.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So during the unprecedented outbreak of COVID-19 across the globe, social distancing and lockdown has been implemented by several countries as a preventive measure to curb the pandemic. On May 20th, more than 100,000 COVID-19 cases have been reported to the World Health Organization in 24 hours, the most in single day since the outbreak began. This week, the United States has over 1.7 million COVID-19 cases, and the death toll has surpassed 100,000. That's the most confirmed deaths of any country in the world. It is equivalent to the entire population of mid-sized cities like Albany, New York. It's more American lives than were lost to the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the September 11, 2001 attack combined. The US unemployment rate hit 14.7% in April, the highest rate since the Great Depression, as 20.5 million jobs vanished in the worst monthly loss on record, and nearly 39 million Americans out of work amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic may make us feel sad, anxious, and confused. Self-isolation may make us feel separate from some of the activities we used to do to help manage our feelings. It is important to learn about resources and support to help us take care of ourselves and our family. This led us to today's discussion on how to maintain mental health during COVID-19. So Dr. Mezulis, what are your recommendations to deal with emotions like stress, anxiety, loneliness, and sorrow of loss that are triggered by COVID-19?
It's a good question. It's a big question. So let me echo a couple of things that you pointed out. So my research team at SPU has been collecting data on the mental health effects of COVID-19 on Americans. We have a sample right now of over 2,500 participants across the US. My area of research is predominantly on adolescent and young adult mental health, so sort of 14 to 25-year-olds is where I focus, but our sample is the entire age range, so we've had a chance to sort of see the mental health effects for everybody. And all the things that you mentioned, we're noticing. So people are definitely reporting an increase in depression symptoms. They're reporting an increase in loneliness. For many individuals, reporting an increase in both general anxiety and also health-related anxiety, as people worry about their own health. And then, probably not a surprise, an increase in what we would consider to be sort of maladaptive coping. So an increase in substance use, and an increase in suicidal thoughts and suicidal behavior, such as self-injury. So we're seeing that in in everybody. Some parts of the population are hit a little worse than others, as we might also expect. Younger individuals, so people under the age of 35, seem to be being hit the hardest. They're reporting the greatest levels of anger, depression, loneliness, the greatest increases in suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And interestingly, older adults who health-wise are really at probably greatest risk are reporting the least mental health effects. And we can talk a little bit about why that might be. So just wanted to echo that I do think we're seeing a pretty significant increase in mental health effects. And it has shifted a little bit over time. And we're in, at least here I'm in Washington State, we're in our 10th week of social distancing lockdown requirements. So it's 2.5 months. It's a long time now. And so we're seeing a little bit of an arc in the mental health effects. Early on, we saw a mix of really high anxiety and stress, like what is this going to be like? What's coming next? Anxiety by definition is uncertainty about the future. And there was a lot of uncertainty those first couple weeks, but also mixed with a little bit of like, this is surreal, this will be over pretty soon, a little bit of cognitive dissonance around it. And so people who weren't sort of personally impacted by health concerns or financial concerns, there was a little bit of it's kind of like an extended spring break, we'll bake sourdough bread and we'll do a lot of walks with the family. And what I'm noticing over time is two things. One, the number of people, sort of the percent of people who are having personal effects, right? Know somebody who's been sick or their own job is being threatened, or mental health concerns in the family are starting to reappear. We're seeing that start to come back out. And then we're also seeing kind of what I would consider to be a type of depression, a kind of lethargy, malaise around it, a little kind of people are feeling very low energy. It's harder to find the motivation and energy to kind of get up each day and do the same thing again. I'm going to get on my Zoom calls and I'm going to work from home and maybe I'll go outside for a social distancing walk in the afternoon. That'll be my big outing. And there's a little less cooking and a little less family games and a little less of some of the things that kept us motivated early on. And so even to say mental health effects, I think it's important to realize that they're evolving over time. And most experts actually predict that the worst mental health effects haven't hit yet, that they'll really hit in the fall and winter. And that's based on research on prior pandemics and also what we know about normal sort of annual transition. So there's a long intro to say, yes, mental health is a big problem. How to deal with it? Stress-related and sort of environmental circumstance-related stress is challenging for a lot of people because it can feel very out of control. The things that are causing us that stress are not things that we can directly act on. And so I think it's important to recognize psychologically what are the things within our domains of control and what are things outside of our domains of control. And it's a little bit of a, sort of sociocultural truism to focus on the things you can control and try to accept and let go of the things that you can't control. But psychological truisms are there sometimes for a reason. There's a lot of wisdom in them. And so I think the first thing that I would recommend people do is do a little bit of a self-inventory of their own emotional response. What is it that they are noticing? Are they noticing this kind of lethargy, low energy, low motivation? Are they noticing anxiety? For a lot of people, uncomfortable emotions and uncertainty come out as anger and irritability with other people. So the first thing to know what to do is kind of know your own response. What is it that I'm experiencing right now? And what has worked for me in the past when I've had difficult times? Of course, that's going to vary by people, but there are some basics that maintain mental health for everybody. One is keeping to a good sleep routine. Sleep is probably the biggest foundation of mental health that we have. So fighting the urge to let sleep patterns get disrupted, if you don't have to get up. I have 2 teenagers, so, I get that. You don't have to get up, letting yourself sleep. What's the harm in taking a nap in the afternoon? But the body is a very sensitive instrument, and we really do rely on a regular schedule and a regular circadian rhythm, and it helps us regulate our emotions tremendously. So the very first thing I would do is say, look a little bit at your basics. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping on a regular schedule, getting enough sleep but not too much sleep, and not having a lot of variability in your circadian rhythm? And and I would recommend that to anybody anytime, but it's even more true times like this. Exercise, keeping your body functioning and moving. A lot of us have found that our movement has really decreased, even if our exercise feels like it hasn't changed, just because there was so much more movement in our day-to-day lives 3 months ago. You walked to your car, you walked from the parking lot to the grocery store, you walked to the restaurant down the street from where you were able to park, you walked, in your office building between offices. And now we end up often spending a tremendous amount of time in one very small space. Maybe we pop out for half an hour to exercise and pop back in, but the movement in the rest of the day is minimal. So I would start there. Those are basics for everybody. And then I'm happy to talk a little bit about sort of more active coping for people who are really noticing significant symptoms.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So the next question is that social distancing is a misnomer, right? We should be physically distancing, but remain as social as ever. How can one be socially engaged when we are practicing physical distancing?
It's a great question, and it's a really nice distinction, because I think some of what's happened with that physical isolation is this perceived sense of social isolation. And I would say two things. I mean, one, it isn't, we don't have the same opportunities for social interaction that we used to. And one of the things we're noticing, for example, in our research study is that one of the reasons that younger adults, so people under 35, are experiencing more loneliness and depression is probably because their sort of go-to strategies of social media are not particularly rewarding and fulfilling social interactions. And yet that's a bit of a go-to for that particular age group. We know that their social media use, which was already really high, has gone up. We know that they're doing that to seek social support. We can see that in the data, and we know it's not a particularly effective strategy. And I think we didn't appreciate, everyone says that about that generation, right? Oh, they're all on their Snapchat and Instagram anyways. But the truth was, when they were going to school and they were going to work, they were having a lot of in-person social interactions that they probably weren't even aware of the richness of them. And with that being taken away and their reliance on social media, we're seeing a lack of quality of social interactions. So it's absolutely true that we are social beings and we need to have social interaction. We need it for lots of reasons. We need a sense of connection to other people. We need social support. And so the ways to do that are to actively seek it, and actively seek it for the motivations and the purposes that it's useful. So there is a significant difference between being on a group text thread. I'm on one, I'm sure you're on one, where you're sending funny memes around to each other, and, and links to great YouTube videos and parodies. And that's absolutely part of social support and connection. We do all need that. It gives us a little bit of humor in our day. It gives us a little bit of connection, but it doesn't give us the other parts of social action that are important too, like someone to actually discuss challenges with and actually seek social support with and have a meaningful conversation about what's going on in your life. People are falling into a pattern of, being like, look at the bread I baked, and, look at this wonderful, social distancing birthday party I threw for my kid. And people that are not talking about the other 23 hours of the day when parents and kids are snipping at each other, and parents are, kids, parents can't get through a work call without a kid coming in, and a kid is, not getting their homework done, and everybody's going stir crazy for being in the house at the same time. When we're out in the world having normal in-person interactions, those things come up. They come up over lunch and in the hallway with our colleagues. And when we're home alone and don't have those natural opportunities, we can sometimes forget to seek the social support on the things that are challenging. So in terms of strategies, it's obviously we need to be reaching out to the people in our lives, but we need to be reaching out with intention, reaching out with an attempt to actually connect around meaningful conversations. So I'm all for the Zoom happy hours and the meme threads and all of that. I think it's really important that we have that fun and that social connection, and that joy in our lives. But we also need to pick up the phone or get on the Zoom call with our best friend or our mother or whoever it is in our life that we get that kind of social support from, if we can't see them in person.
Yeah, I do want to talk a little bit about that and say that, yeah, because I have like coworkers, I have friends, and I haven't really been able to see them. So yeah, it's just being able to, just have a good, meaningful conversation with them does go a long way.
We're seeing a pretty significant rise in social anxiety. In a funny way, people who are a little bit socially anxious have really liked this time because all that sort of day-to-day social interaction, right? Like you don't have to have the conversation in the hallway at school. You don't have to worry about making that, conversation in the lunchroom at work. So in some ways, people with social anxiety have really liked this time. But we also know that it amplifies that social anxiety because it makes the reaching out even that much harder. And I've had this conversation with, with my own kids and my own clients about, why don't you actually call or send a meaningful text to this person, that person? Oh, I don't know how they'll respond. I don't know if we're really that kind of friend. I don't know. And there's sometimes I think a hesitancy and an anxiety about being the one who reaches out. But I think most of us from life experience know how meaningful it is when we get those actual people reaching out to us. And we're so grateful because then we know we can go reach out back out to them. And so one of the things I would always say to people is, imagine if you got that text from that person, that colleague, that friend.
Exactly.
Very few of us would be like, oh, why are they reaching out to me? I'm not that. They'd be like, oh, what a lovely gesture. I would love to talk with them. I can't believe they were thinking about me. It's so neat that they were thinking about me. Most of us would have that reaction. And so we should imagine that if we were to do the reach out, the person receiving it would have that reaction too.
I think that segues actually great into my next question. So I used to volunteer at Crisis Connections, which is our King County local emotional support line for people that aren't from around here.
Yep.
So, and now I'm on hiatus because, well, the pandemic. I have a family that, just in case. So a lot of clients would often call in, about needing emotional support, which could be like they're feeling depressed, or they feel like they want to commit suicide, or they want to, like a whole slew of different reasons. So I'm just going to go over a few statistics really quick. So suicide is the number 10 leading cause of death in the United States. It is the number 2 cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds in Washington state. The Seattle-Tacoma area has the second highest suicide attempt rate out of the 33 largest metropolitan areas in the United States. And why is that? Well, it could be because socioeconomic changes, and globally, suicide rates have often fallen when living conditions have improved, and vice versa. So Mahanor has already talked a bit about different socioeconomic triggers caused by COVID-19, such as death and unemployment rate. So what are a few ways that people could do to help themselves, and how can family, friends, or loved ones help as well?
Yeah. It is an interesting point because on the one hand, we have such a tremendous amount of wealth and opportunity, in the Seattle area, but we also have a lot of economic, unique features that can really impact families. One is we have a really high immigrant population. We have a pretty high binomial distribution of wealth in the Seattle area, right? We have pretty high homelessness rates. We have a high rate of individuals who have immigrated, who are often coming in without financial resources to get started in an extremely expensive city to live in, with language barriers, with a significant, often trauma history based on the reasons that led to them immigrating to the U.S. Mixed with this high-tech culture where there's a tremendous amount of wealth and opportunity, right? So we have a really significant problem with distribution of wealth in the Seattle area. We also have a couple of unique features. Being more north, we know northern cities tend to struggle with depression and suicide more than other places. We also know that Seattle is one of the most expensive places to live right now, and that the cost of living has gone up significantly in the last several years. The cost of buying a house, the cost of putting kids in school. So all those things. We also have, and finally, especially among younger individuals, we have a pretty significant sort of gig economy in the U.S. and in Seattle, even relative to the U.S. We have a lot of people making their incomes based on working as Instacart workers or Uber drivers, or, part-time contract work with a lot of the consulting companies and high-tech companies, which when the economy is good and work is there, is a phenomenal way to be flexible. And actually often those people, when things are good, are making a tremendously great income. But when things get stressful like this, you start to see the holes in that system where they didn't have healthcare and they didn't have a guaranteed job contract. So we are struggling in the Seattle area, and you're right, the statistics, we're up to something like 1 in 10 youth under 24 in Washington State making a suicide attempt at some point. It's pretty high. What to do? It's challenging, and I'm not a financial or economic expert at all. So I can talk a little bit about the mental health effects and a little bit about sort of problem solving and social support. More than I can talk about the financial or economic strategies for solving. So as I said,
Yes.
There are different kinds of, right? Any kind of mental health problem, I always use this phrase, it's a combination of stress and resources, right? The stress that the world is putting on you, the environment is putting on you, combined with your own resources, mental health, psychological resources to cope with it. Anybody can be pushed to the point of having mental health problems when stress gets tough. You take anybody and put them under enough stress, and it doesn't matter how psychologically healthy they are overall, we can push that person into having mental health problems, and vice versa. People who are really at risk, who really lack psychological coping skills, sometimes it doesn't take that much stress then to give them problems. So what we're seeing right now, unfortunately, is that those stresses have really gone up. And people who even had good coping resources in normal times are finding that they're insufficient right now, and it's not that they have a deficit. It's not that they don't have good coping. It's that we're giving them so much stress that we've exceeded their capacity to cope with it now. So if you think about it that way, I often think about it as that sort of teeter-totter. If we cannot reduce the stressors, right, because we often don't have the capacity to just magically make that job reappear and magically make finances better and magically make the health threats go away. If we can't get the stressors down, what we have to do is build resources. And so resources include things like problem solving. It's very easy when you feel overwhelmed and hopeless to say that there's nothing I can do, right? The scope in which I can act is actually impossible because this is all happening outside of me. This is all stressors. But we often have more resources than we know. So, sitting down with a good and trusted friend or partner in the family to say, what are the financial and economic supports in my community? There are a lot of organizations attempting to support people right now in terms of financial support, in terms of job support, in terms of health insurance support. We don't have the best social network in the US, but we don't have zero social networks. We do have some. And helping connect people with those resources when sometimes they feel helpless and overwhelmed, that is a form of coping. We were just talking about social support and the importance of being able to talk with and get support from close people in your lives about how stressful and anxious this feels. When we are overwhelmed and feel helpless and anxious about it, it's very difficult to take any functional steps forward. But when we're overwhelmed and feel supported and less anxious, sometimes we can see a path forward that we might not have seen. So some of the basics that we talked about remembering to take care of yourself, remembering to reach out and ask for help for people in your lives, remembering to do what you can to take a deep breath, manage the anxiety, and make a list of the things that you might be able to do to take a small step forward. It doesn't change the stress. Job loss is real. Lack of health insurance is real. None of this meditation is not going to solve those problems, right? But what we believe as psychologists is that when you are seeking social support, when you can get yourself into a calm, well-regulated state, your capacity to go and address the problems that are within your scope goes up. So that's the best I can offer right there.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr.
Great.
Mezulis. This question is also related to how do we support others, right? How can we support a loved one who is very anxious, depressed, or lost someone due to COVID-19?
Yeah, it's, to some extent, this is the same way we would support anybody who's going through a hard time, who's grieving, or who is anxious. We have a natural human instinct to do two things. To one, we want other people to feel better and have it not be a big deal. And or two, we want to solve the problem. Those are natural human instincts because we don't like seeing other people in pain. And so it comes from a good place. It unfortunately is often not received in the same way, because mostly when people are suffering, there are real things causing their suffering. And to have someone say, get over it, it's not such a big deal, let's look on the bright side, let's do this, this, or this to solve the problem, while very well intentioned, feels very invalidating. So the very first thing I would say is just be supportive. Listen, ask people how they're feeling, ask, what can I do? Be willing to listen and suppress the desire to go immediately in and try to solve the problem. Sometimes there are very obvious things that the person could be doing that would maybe help them cope better. But just because we see it doesn't mean, right, so that we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make them drink, sort of thing. Just because we see what someone else could be doing or even should be doing doesn't mean that they can see it yet. And when we push them too far, then not only are they not seeing the obvious solution, but they feel unsupported and like they don't have a partner in that. The best thing we can do is walk alongside people in pain and be willing to listen and willing to support them. And when they're ready to take new steps or solve a problem at hand or do the next thing, then at least we're there with them to support them. But we know that motivation has to come from them. So that's my best advice, is listen and really validate that emotional experience. It does not make it worse. We have this instinctive, I always say that psychology is like 90% what grandma told you and 10% exactly the opposite. And there's nothing in between. So 90% of the laws of life are exactly as you would say, like stress goes up, depression goes up. And there's a couple like big exceptions to that. And this is one of those where our absolute human instinct is to minimize emotions and solve problems. And it's exactly the wrong thing to do when people are suffering. But it comes from a good place. And so whatever we can do to suppress that and really just listen, we believe that if we say things like, yes, this is really hard. Yes, you're anxious. God, this is awful. I'm so sorry this happened to you. We somehow believe that if we say those things, it makes people feel worse. But actually the data is really clear that it doesn't. It makes people feel better and it makes them feel supported. People who have lost someone, this is true in any circumstance. This is true for any reason that someone has lost a loved one. They really on average, most people want the opportunity to talk about their loved one. This does not necessarily it might make them sad. It's not that it doesn't make them sad, but most often people so much don't want that person's life to have been forgotten. They want to know that that person's life mattered, that their loss mattered. And so the opportunity to talk about that person is often a tremendous gift. And we so often tiptoe around people who have lost a loved one. We don't want to bring them up. We don't want to upset them. We're so careful about it to a point that it's actually detrimental to the grieving person, who often really would love the opportunity. They're thinking about this person all the time. So if that's what's on their mind and everybody else is walking around so carefully never to bring the person up, it's such a weird disconnect that happens. And so that's a real gift to people who have actually lost a loved one, is to give them the opportunity to talk about them, share a memory, ask for a memory. Those are tremendous gifts to give someone who's grieving.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mezulis. So the next question related to the children. This time may be very challenging for children and adolescents, some of whom might not understand the reasons for school closures and the cancellation of extracurricular activities. In addition, they are likely to be bombarded with information through social media and from their friends that can cause anxiety and alarm. Young people may also sense the anxiety of their parents and worry about their own health and that of other family members. For example, young children may not understand why they can no longer hug a grandparent. So how do we talk to children about COVID-19 and its impact?
It's a great question. The New York Times had an article last week, I think, on the mental health effects of young children, elementary school age children, from this, because we're really expecting children to do something that's so not natural to them. I mean, children develop by being in school, by being in interaction with their peers. They develop through relationships and play and a lot of outdoor activities. And we have really restricted those opportunities right now for them. And so a lot of them are struggling, as you said, many of them are struggling without sort of being developmentally capable to really understand the situation. So I think the responses need to be developmentally appropriate, obviously, with older kids who are likely to be accessing social media. This is true even when it's not COVID-19 time, that parents should be educating their kids on reliable news sources and what kind of information is valid and reliable on all social media platforms. And so we can set a real role model that way about the information that we share with our kids. And that's not to say we should be in there monitoring their phones and everything, but more when we talk about, when we are able to talk about the news that we're reviewing, we're able to talk honestly about the times when we see fake news versus we're seeing real news and how we evaluate that, that at least provides a role model for them to how to start having those kinds of evaluations themselves. Kids are also a little more savvy than we give them credit for, I want to say. But younger children, it is very challenging. So I think my best advice to younger families is whatever we can do to keep their lives as normal as possible and give them those normal developmental opportunities, we're always going to see the best outcomes. So that is whatever as much outside time as we can get, even if it's social distancing. I would say one of the things that has surprised me in the last 2 months is the number of people, and I hear this from my own clients, who really aren't leaving their houses. And there's not been lockdown saying that you can't be outside as long as you're not in contact. You don't have to be in a public place, but you can be on your neighborhood street or in a park that doesn't have people in it, or there are a lot of outdoor spaces. And, so this immediate conflation of social distancing with like physical isolation in your own space. And there are places, of course, in more urban areas, it's much more challenging, of course. But whatever we can do to get younger kids physically moving outside, interacting with their siblings, interacting with their parents. Kids are tough. They're not going to do a play date on Zoom. We can try, but it is not the real thing. I've heard a couple really creative strategies. So I'll tell you about one sort of creative interactive strategy I've heard of, and then one sort of explanatory strategy that I've heard that I think are very creative. And I have older kids and I work mostly with older kids, so I'm not as good with little ones. But so the interactive strategy is, so one of the things we know about kids is they just engage in play. They don't necessarily always interact with each other. There's a lot of even much into 8, 10, 12 years old. They're not constantly talking and interacting while they're playing. They're often just playing with other people around them. So of course, to some extent, cooperative games and group games are important. But I was reading about a family that will just pop up. They'll have the grandparents, pop up on the Zoom screen and literally just put the laptop in the kid's bedroom. And the kid is just playing. They're not sort of been expected to go talk to grandma and grandpa, because an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old isn't going to sit there and talk to grandma and grandpa. Yeah. But grandma and grandpa are pretty happy to watch kid play, and kid is playing. And interestingly, of course, as the hour goes on, there is some interaction. Oh, look at this. Oh, what's that toy over in the corner? And the kid is just kind of doing their kid thing, but with grandma and grandpa on the phone. And I thought that was such a brilliant strategy to not try to force an odd social interaction that isn't natural to the child, but sort of create the circumstances in which a kind of common social interaction could occur where the kid is just playing, but all of a sudden there are people around them. And so I wonder about doing that with other kids too, where you both just have your phones up or their laptops up, but they're playing kind of on their own. My guess is if we don't tell them, play with your friend, play with your friend, play with your friend, we just step back and let those cameras roll, my guess is at some point they would start interacting. But
they will naturally do something, whatever they usually do, like to do, but with the support. Yeah.
Yeah, with just some way of trying to get someone else in the room with them. That's one. The explanatory one that I've really liked is it has been very hard. You brought up this thing like how you can't go hug grandma and grandpa, and kids are physical, affectionate, exuberant creatures, and they like physical contact and they want to show love in that way. So one of the explanations, as opposed to saying to kids constantly, which is not a good parenting or developmental strategy, a constant like, no, you can't, it could make them sick, it could do this, all the things that are bad, is reframing it to, we know you love grandma and grandpa, and how we show love for people right now is by giving them space. Space is love. That is the way in which we're showing love. We can do virtual hugs but to repackage the language around that the space giving is not a restriction. It's not you can't hug. It's that you show love to grandma and grandpa by giving them space right now. And I really liked that little switch of the message because kids want to be nice. Kids want to be loving. Kids want to do the right thing. And so if we can reframe this is how you are a good person. This is how you're a nice kid. This is how you're a loving kid, is by giving people space. We find that it's easier for kids to then do it naturally.
Excellent explanation. Thank you. Stefan, the next one?
Yeah. So because of, we have like a shelter in place right now, and probably for a while. So we're observing, new parent-child dynamics. So the parents, if they have a job, they are working from home, or if they don't. So at least from parents, they could be doing a lot of things, such as they're teaching the children, or they're taking care of household stuff, or they're entertaining or keeping them engaged. But it can be a lot to do on a parent, or it could be, if the parent isn't doing enough, it could be perhaps neglectful for the children. So what is it that you recommend parents can do to a possibly overwhelming situation?
Yes, this is a huge problem, and it's a huge problem from transitioning out of shelter in place back into, increasing opportunities to be out in the community, because it really does all start with kids. Parents can't get back to work until kids can be back in school or childcare, and so we have a bit of a circular problem. The very first thing I would say is this is not a natural situation. We were not meant to be full-time employees working at home while educating and raising our kids during the entire day that they were supposed to be at school. We have a social norm in which we separate and outsource those responsibilities. Kids go to school to learn from qualified teachers. They go to childcare while they're being taken care of by quality childcare providers, while we go to work and do our work. This is not how this was ever meant to be. And so the very first thing I would say is we have to call a spade and say, this is the idea that we could be doing either of those jobs well, our full-time job or educating and raising our children, that we could be doing both of those at 100% simultaneously is impossible. And so the very first thing I would say is we need to really lower our expectations and get our priorities clear, and trust that life is long. So one of the things that there's all sorts of things on people's minds, and everyone has unique circumstances. In some families, it may be that the parent being able to keep their job because they need it financially, that may be the number one priority in that family, and that is a value and a priority in that family, and I absolutely honor that. And that might mean that we have to say that for that family, for this period of time, it's okay that those kids are not learning much, that they are on screens a lot, that they are, for a few weeks out of their very long lives, not getting the kind of rich interaction, parent-child interaction, peer interaction that we would like for them. Does not mean they're neglected. Neglected means they don't have food. Neglected means they're never given a hug or told that they're loved. It's just meant that they're not given the fully rich life that we would like to give them. But if your kid is fed and dressed and alive at the end of this pandemic, they have many, many, many more years to learn their multiplication tables. And we know this from many, many years. Kids recover from periods of time. I mean, think about a kid who got sick, right? Think about a kid who had an illness and had to take 6 or 12 months off school. We don't believe that for their whole rest of their lives, they're behind. It takes them some time to catch up, but we trust that they do. So this is a period of time that is exceptional. It is different, and the normal rules of life do not apply. And so the family for whom the parents absolutely have to work, it is not an option to take FMLA. It is not an option to not give 100% because they might lose their job. Then we need to make sure that that works. And let's put the expectations for kids' education interaction, we can drop them down for a short period of time. I'm not saying 10 years of this, but I'm saying 10 weeks is not going to kill that kid. As long as they are alive and fed and told at night that they're loved, they'll be okay in the long run when things get back to normal and we can get those other priorities back on the table. And the reverse is true too. If families have the capacity to take a break from their work, to reduce their hours so that they can focus on trying to educate their kids right now or keep them on track, or they have kids with special needs. I mean, there are kids with special needs. There are kids who have developmental disabilities who are getting support services in the school. There are kids who have educational special needs and learning disabilities who aren't getting, we're not qualified to take care of kids who often have a lot of needs and demands. And we don't have the expertise as parents often to respond to those. If that's your child, then maybe that's your priority is I need to do the best I can to keep them on track. That's a huge priority in our family. If that means maybe my income has to suffer for a little while, my opportunity for professional success needs to drop, I need to really have a heart-to-heart with my boss or my organization about taking a leave, reducing my hours. It is not ideal. And for many families, these are choices that all of them feel bad, but I would start with the premise that this was never meant to be successful. This is not a system for success. And so we have to be thinking about what is the bare minimum that we need to get through it, right? There's, when things are hard, our biggest goal is to get through it without making them worse. And so what is the worst that the family is worried about? Are they worried about the worst thing that could happen now is that we lose our job because then we lose, right? Then we need to really make sure that they're keeping their job. But if the worst that can happen is my kid who's had these, educational needs or mental health needs, that they get off track, then that's where the priority should be. But this idea that you can do all those things simultaneously is impossible. And I know so many parents feeling so much guilt around not being an effective teacher, not being an effective, daycare provider, not being an effective summer camp counselor, like keeping everybody happy and engaged and learning and moving along, and forgetting that we were never meant to be in this situation and that it is okay. And there's not going to be, this is a developmental psychologist telling you out there, there will not be long-term negative impact on your kids from 10 or 12 weeks of less than ideal education or social interaction. They have a lot of years to catch back up on those things. There will not be long-term impacts. If you are providing them with a good and stable home, plenty of love, they will be okay in the long run, and we can let some of the other expectations go. The math worksheet, not the end of the world if it gets done or doesn't done. And there are, of course, exceptions to all of that, right? I have high school students, like they actually have to get their work done or they don't graduate, right? So, I mean, there's always an exception to that rule, but the 7 or 8-year-old who's got this like math worksheet, please, like we can catch that stuff back up, protect the relationships, protect the stability of the family, protect everybody's mental health. If those things are stable, we'll get back on track with some of the other things.
I'm with a 6-year-old right now, so it's like, it feels good to hear that. So thank you.
Yeah. Is she alive? You're doing good.
She's good.
Yeah. It's so hard. This was just not how any of us were meant to do this. And we put so much, it's a very American cultural script, the sort of script that we have to be so successful in all these domains all the time. And it really pains me to see people feeling so badly about all the parts of it and not stepping back and being like, This was an impossible problem to solve. So why are you expecting that you somehow were able to solve it? And the people who seem like they're doing it, you know, almost always have circumstances or resources that are hidden to the rest of us, right? They're in a very, you know, protected financial circumstance. They have older kids or kids with, you know, not unusual needs. They have supports in the house. They have a spouse who can, I mean, there's so many exceptions to those rules, but for the most people, this is a really hard situation.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, moving on to, let's see. So the Harvard class of 2020, at least that are graduating, so they're not able to, well, you know, they just had like, I think they had their commencement, was it yesterday or was it today? But
I think it's been over, maybe over the weekend too, because there were a bunch of things. I follow the Harvard like Instagram, and I know they've been posting like everybody's home graduation celebrations, you know? So it's been some time.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to bring up more about incoming freshmen. So so not the people that are graduating, but for the 2024. So they may not be able to go to campus this year, you know, start off their first semester, maybe even the first year. So, and for students and parents, it could be disconcerting. So it's like, hey, I just got into this place, but maybe they're not there physically to feel like, oh, I'm actually in. So perhaps like, well, what is it that parents and students can do to like cope with this?
Oh, yeah. So, and I don't know how much research you did on my background, but I have one of these kids. So I have a high school senior who's graduating. She's not starting at Harvard. She's starting at Brown in the fall.
Congrats.
Thank you. And so I'm watching all this play out in my real life, right? Because, you know, part of what's been allowing her to be okay with not getting her senior spring, right? I mean, she didn't get prom. She's not getting graduation. She was supposed to be singing in Carnegie Hall in New York this past weekend for her, she's in public school, just a public school choir trip. She didn't get any of these things. She's not getting any of these things. And she's been sad about it, but less sad than I think I might have expected. And I think it's been because she's just holding on. She spends a lot of time on her college website, right? Like looking at classes, looking at dorms. She spends a lot of time on that Instagram account connecting with the other incoming freshmen. I think she's really holding on to, it'll all be over when I go to college. And a lot of us adults are going, it's unclear what will happen there. And it's hard because you don't want to take away that hope from them that they'll be able to have the traditional start to school. Most students don't know yet. I mean, so that it really is a time of uncertainty and anxiety. You know, the Cal State system announced that they are definitely going to be 100% online. So those students know that, right? That affects a lot of us here in Seattle. We have a lot of students from Washington who go down to Cal Poly and the California State schools. So they know already they do not get their traditional freshman start in the dorm. They will be still at home, still with their parents, doing classes on a computer like this. And in some ways, psychologically, it's nice to know because at least you can start preparing for that. How do we make it feel like a transition to college when we don't know? I think what's hard for the incoming Harvard students or students like my daughter is we don't know yet. There's not, I mean, most schools have communicated that their hope is to have at least freshmen on campus to start on time because they're aware of how salient that freshman experience is for getting started in college. So I remain hopeful that many, if not all, or most universities will find a way to have freshmen be on campus in the fall, even if it's, you know, scheduled over time or they come back at Thanksgiving or. So I guess the first thing I would say is we are all learning how to tolerate uncertainty. There's a whole concept in psychology called tolerance of uncertainty, and people vary on that. Some of us really can handle things being unknown. We can go with the flow. We can let things evolve. Others of us, and this is often a type of person who goes to a place like Harvard, we really like to know what's coming. We don't tolerate uncertainty very well. But it's an uncertain time, and it does require a tremendous amount of sort of acceptance of that and a willingness to say, I don't know what's going to happen. but I trust that the same skills and personal resources that got me into Harvard are going to help me cope with whatever comes next. These are very high achieving kids. These are kids who have figured out how to solve problems in their lives. These are kids who, many of them, have overcome significant adversity and challenges in their lives to get to this place where they have the opportunity to go to Harvard. I trust fully that those same internal personal resources that made them a student that Harvard wants are what is going to help them figure out how to do this in an unusual way. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but I trust that we'll all solve those problems along the way. And there are a lot of ways to skin the same cat, right? I mean, what are the important features of going to college? Some of it's the academic challenge. Some of it's the personal challenge of trying new things. Some of it is the actual moving away. So some parts of those may not happen in the same way, but we can as parents also help them have the other experiences perhaps in other ways that are meaningful, helping them with choosing their classes, helping them with giving them more autonomy, even if they're still in the home space, so that they have the feeling of being a college student. Maybe they're more responsible for their food or their living situation. But I have to just trust that we'll all solve those problems along the way. But it's going to be disappointing. I mean, I think you want me to solve problems. I already told you, nature, I'm not. The first thing we have to do is acknowledge that the problems are there. And I mean, my kid is going to be heartbroken if she can start school in the fall. And I'm sure all these kids are. And that's okay. It's okay to be heartbroken. And we'll do the best we can to support them when that happens.
Since we are working from home, it is hard to turn off work. Wake up, no commute, and turn on the laptop. Then at the end of the day, one more email, one more task, one more meeting. But this can easily snowball, right? What do you recommend young adults or parents do if they're working from home?
Yeah, this I have more clear and very specific advice. So we just need to be really dedicated to managing our mental health and setting boundaries on our work. So I already talked a little bit about the importance of keeping a schedule and regular sleep. So I do think part of that is, I mean, there are people, so first of all, there's an entire world of people who work from home permanently, for whom this isn't new. And so this advice has been out there for years, right? So this advice is things like, you set your work schedule. You set when you start and you set when you're done. And when you're done, you need to stick to it. That means it can be things, there are environmental cues you can use, like trying to work in a different space than you do leisure, which any psychologist would tell you, you shouldn't be on your laptop in your bed. You probably shouldn't even be on your phone in your bed. You probably shouldn't be on your laptop in your cozy evening TV or reading chair, right? You should be on your laptop in the space that is dedicated to work so that you go to work. And when you're done with work, you need to be done with work. Now, there's nothing involved in this except for self-discipline. We have to really be committed to setting our own boundaries on it. And I've always had, because I'm in academia and I have always commuted 45 to 60 minutes into my job. I have, since I started SPU, I've worked at home 1 to 3 days a week, depending on my teaching schedule and other things. But it's very different working at home 5 days a week, right? Because my one day at home was kind of fun because in between I go do the laundry and clean the kitchen, right? It was nice to catch up on house chores. But now I have a lot more work demands, and I was finding that like it was really spilling. And I was finding that, I would choose, and this is a choice, but I would choose it's a beautiful day here today, right? I might choose at 1 or 2 o'clock to go for a walk or do my workout outside. But then I would feel like, well, then I have to be on email or work until 7 o'clock at night, right? Because I took this break. And that's fine as long as I'm intentional about it, as long as I got the break. The problem is on the days that I didn't take the walk at 1 o'clock, but I'm still on my email until 7 or 8 o'clock at night because I broke the mental barrier. So it really is just a question of self-discipline. I mean, I really recommend having regular work hours, having a time at the end of the day when you say, I'm done. I am not going to check email or work again. And that isn't to say maybe that's permanent. Maybe you say, so one of the things I've been doing is at about 4 o'clock, I try to be done. I do my workout. I have my dinner with my kids. And then I give myself 30 or 45 minutes at 7:30, 8 o'clock to go back in and kind of clean up the email so I don't wake up to, there's nothing worse than waking up to like all the things you missed from the day before. But I try very hard to keep it to that little bit of cleanup. And in between, I didn't touch it. I let it accumulate for 4 or 5 hours in there. I also really recommend having at least one day a week, like having a weekend where there's a day a week where you're not working. I mean, kids were used to this with school, right? They used to go to school Monday through Friday, and Saturdays and Sundays they didn't have school. We were used to having work days and non-work days. One of the things that's happening at home is all the days are blurring together a little bit. But I really recommend saying, you know, whatever day of the week it is for you, but to have one day where you really commit to not working. And whatever that means to you, to me, it means I have to actually not answer or look at my email, because that's the horrible, you know, black hole of work to me, is that once I start answering email, then I answer another one, and one wants me to do something, and then all of a sudden I'm in this. So I have a day where I'm like, you know, really honestly, absolutely no one will, and nothing in my life has fallen apart. I mean, this is the magical thing. It's a hypothesis that you can test, that your job, your relationships, nothing will actually fall apart if you do not answer email for 24 hours. You may not believe it, but you know what? The great thing about hypotheses is that you can gather data on that. And so I challenge everybody to go out and test the hypothesis that if they don't answer their email for an entire 24 hours, that the world does not actually fall apart on them. And then I would say the last one is, we were talking a little bit before. So the biggest one is just schedule, and really being disciplined about having work times and non-work times. The second one I would say is that issue of movement. So the not having enough physical movement in our day is also part of this, like, lower energy. We feel like we're not effective, and then things start to drag off. My youngest daughter does a brilliant thing. I don't have an Apple Watch, so I can't do it, but we could really all do it on our cell phones. She has a little alert on her phone every single hour that she has to get up, and for 3 minutes she does jumping jacks, she does sit-ups, she jogs and plays. She's very just sort of self-determined in this way, and just gets her body a little bit of movement. She set herself a movement goal just to not sort of like become one with her chair all day. And I watch it happen. I'll be watching her work, and I'll hear the little thing go ding, and she'll be like, oh, because it didn't occur to her to do it. She needed the reminder. But we could all do that. I mean, we all have our phones within, 2 steps of us. We could put a little alert on our phone every hour. That's just, 1 minute out of the hour to just get up and move around the house does not hurt anybody.
Okay, excellent.
We
are ready to wrap up now. So Dr. Mezulis, do you have any other recommendations for our audience?
Sure. I think my biggest recommendations would be that there are a lot of resources out there to support people. There's probably nothing that you're going through that there aren't other people going through right now. And there are community resources to support, economic and financial and health needs. There are a lot of mental health resources out there. We started this conversation about it being a Harvard in tech, and we didn't talk much about the teletherapy service that we're working on. But one of the things that we're trying to do with this program at UpLift is use technology to make mental health more accessible to teenagers and young adults, because they're so used to engaging. They're used to this online learning, and they're used to being on their phones all the time. And so there's really no reason that we can't be delivering mental health care in this way. And I think that's one thing we're all learning, is that there's a lot more we can do virtually than we've done before. So I think we're seeing a lot of innovation in the space of telehealth and telemental health. And it's been really fun to be part of that. But those resources are out there. There's a funny belief, I think, right now that everything is on pause. And you've been seeing it in the news, right? People aren't getting their kids vaccinated. People are dying at homes of heart attacks because they don't feel like they can go to the doctor. There's this weird psychology of being homebound, even when we have needs. But I really encourage people to push past that. If you're starting to struggle, if you're noticing that anxiety is creeping up, that depression is creeping up, those thoughts of suicide are creeping up, your substance use is creeping up, you're noticing it in your kids, don't wait for this to be done, but that seek support now because there are resources out there. There are the Crisis Connection resources, a wonderful one, the King County Crisis Line, as well as a lot of mental health counselors and other supports out in the community for all ranges on the income scale and all different insurances and payment types. But I would just encourage people to be on top of their mental health like they would anything else.
Okay, so on behalf of Harvard in Tech Seattle, Stefan and I, thank you for your time today. We have learned a lot, and certainly this session would be helpful for our audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is remarkable how significantly all of our lives have changed over the past months. We hope you and your loved ones are staying safe and healthy during COVID-19. We are grateful for the connections and strength of the Harvard alumni community. Thanks to your generosity and support. Hope this video is helpful for you. If you are interested in learning more, please join us at LinkedIn, Harvard in Tech Seattle. Thank you and goodbye for now.
Thank you so much. Good luck.
Okay. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.